Morning, fellas, weather fans, everybody, and this is an early start to the morning. We had a long night going over the storms last night that hit the Midwest across Missouri and Arkansas, going into the Ohio Valley, and so we're starting pretty early today. Got my coffee going because it was hard for me to wake up this morning, I tell you. All right, so a couple things to look at here. We do have that convection outlook that is over the coastal states on the East Coast here with this slight risk right here in the center. We are not looking at uh, anything as intense or as extreme as what we had across the Midwest yesterday, but ahead of this cold front here, we got this low pressure system, which is actually going to be merging with another low pressure system moving up the Atlantic coast. And when it does, it can intensify things a little bit with the leftover buoyancy that's here. We have a mid-level jet that's going through here as well, which is going to kind of stir up some of that shear. There is some good and bad parts to this. Through the Ohio Valley, we're looking at the possibility of around 30 knot wind shear as far as the bulk wind shear going through the Ohio Valley. So not too much wind in this area getting this stirred up, but it is possible. There is still wind there that is sufficient enough to get a tornado or two spun up with some of that leftover buoyancy that's there. Um, I mean, Cape isn't really that impressive today. I mean, looking at low levels of Cape, anywhere from 5,000 or 500 to 1,000 joules of Cape, and looking at the instability, I mean, it's a little bit unstable, but it's not, staggeringly unstable. So, the National Weather Service said that a tornado or two across parts of the Ohio Valley, West Virginia, and even parts of North Carolina here, a brief tornado or two cannot be ruled out. But honestly, I mean, we're going to look at the data a little bit and see what is going on, but honestly, I don't think that there's going to be any tornadoes today. I think that the main threat of what you have to worry about today is going to be damaging wind threats. So it is going to be windy because in the Ohio Valley, we're getting about 30 knot relative bulk wind shear with this low coming across with this cold front. But down in here, where we have that slight risk, we're getting upwards of 50 to 60 knot wind shear. All right, so that wind shear is going to be much different in these areas. It's going to be very windy today. Make sure that you have your property strapped down and kind of batten down the hatches for today, where that wind can damage some of your property. All right, rainfall amounts. We're going to look at that also in the data, but you can see how wide, and broad that some of these segments of rain is on the radar here. So, anywhere I would estimate anywhere from, an inch to 2 inches of maximum rainfall across these areas as they kind of blow across. So let's go ahead and check out some of the data. So this is that 2% marginal risk that the National Weather Service put out for the tornado risk in this area here. This is the part of the country here where they're saying that kind of low chance for some brief spin-up tornadoes is possible. But I mean, looking at the atmospherics now, this is the outlook for tomorrow, which we're also going to go over. But looking at the atmospherics the way that it is now, I don't really think that. I think it's a very low chance for the tornadoes. I mean, the temperatures are not very high. Still got some chilly weather up here. I mean, 58 some places in Ohio here, you know what I mean? 57. Got some spikes in temperature up there, but where it is a little bit warmer of a day. And then we got daytime heating as well. But, the dew points, yeah, they're a little bit on the higher scale, but they're relatively low. I mean, this whole area of the country is relatively wet because everywhere we've had a pretty decent rainfall amount over the last few weeks, just a lot of rain coming through. So everything's going to be wet, but with those dew points, it doesn't look like it's staggeringly high. We're not getting dew points in the 60s or 70s. Surface Cape, you can see these 250s and 100 popping up. And I mean, this may increase during the day. We're looking at the possibility of 500 to about 1,000 joules of Cape, which, shows a little bit of the instability, but it's not horrible. But tornadoes could still form in that. So now you can see this bulk wind shear that's going through here. It says 50 to 60 knot pretty much everywhere with that bulk wind shear that's going through, but I think it's going to be more isolated in where we're getting these higher speeds of bulk wind shear. I think that it's going to kind of go up and down in certain places where we're getting faster wind shear in certain places, and that's why I think in these coastal eastern states with this kind of bowing kind of feature here, moving along with the jet, I think you're going to get higher wind shear rates on the coastal regions than you are really in the Ohio Valley. Alright, the surface vortice is kind of reaching up to our areas here of these coastal states, kind of lingering over Kentucky and Tennessee right now, coming up through Mississippi, Louisiana, kind of reaching up there, and you can see a little bit of that surface vortice that's still left over from that buoyancy from the storms last night as it kind of passes through into the northeast. Not very high levels of it, but just because we have a lot of surface vortice doesn't necessarily mean we're going to have a lot of tornadoes. So don't let that freak you out. And then supercell composite and tornado parameter isn't even there in these areas. So I think that those levels are going to stay relatively low for today. We still have some decent LCL in some of these areas here. So that instability really hasn't moved in yet. And it might during the day when we have that buoyancy left over with some daytime heating. It might bring a little bit of instability to the atmosphere, but I don't think that it's going to be, I don't see it becoming massively unstable. So a little bit of instability there. There's that tornado threat there. That damaging wind threat is going to be the primary threat throughout this region for today, going across the Ohio Valley. That 15% risk additional for that high wind threat across some of the coastal states on the east coast, Virginia, West Virginia, North Carolina. Even in these, 5% risk in South Carolina, coastal portions of North Carolina, all the way up into Pennsylvania and Ohio, Kentucky, North Carolina on the eastern side. So we do have some wind that's going to be chucking around there today. And then a very small 5%, it says 5% for hail risk. That might happen, but I think it's going to be more periodical. I don't think that it's going to be continuous. So that is the deal for that. As far as the convection outlook for day 2, they do have a little bit of a higher risk tomorrow in what would be the typical tornado alley going stretching from Texas all the way up to Nebraska. So, and they do have an enhanced risk that is outlined for that. So we do have a 2% marginal risk for tornadoes stretching from Texas to Nebraska, with that 5% isolated risk for some tornadoes in Oklahoma stretching from Texas to Kansas. Damaging winds, definitely going to be a factor. Even this convection outlook a little bit has that bowing structure a little bit there. So that tells me that the storms are probably going to be kind of forming in that same sort of shape. So if they do have that bowing structure going through this region in the Midwest, they're probably going to have some damaging winds associated with them. We have that 30% additional high risk for some damaging winds in that center portion where those tornadoes are possible through the Midwest, going from Texas all the way up to Kansas. So definitely tomorrow is a day to be a little bit weather aware, just to make sure you know what's going on. Follow the instructions and the knowledge set forth by your local weather stations, and they will lead you through it. And I will be here as well. So we do have some hail risk associated with that as well. There is a hatched area here for what would be kind of an additional 10% risk for that hail. So we do have a damaging hail risk all across this region. From the very bottom of Texas all the way up to Nebraska, and a little bit covering across the border here in South Dakota. Maybe a little bit in Iowa there as well. So pretty much anywhere in this region you could have hail tomorrow. And so damaging hail could be a threat. Alright, so we're going to go over the data for today and tomorrow as well. So looking at that, and then day 3, goes into the southeast region. There's still a lot of uncertainty with this as it continues on from the Midwest. So I'm not going to do this today. I'm going to wait until there's a little bit more updates and we know a little bit more about what we're dealing with before I cover that, because I don't want to anticipate anything that would be the wrong thing and tell you the wrong details. So without further ado, let's go over to the models and see what we can figure out about today. I don't think that the maybe high-res model might give us a little bit of something here. So you can see that structure there with that nice bowing segment right there. It might have some damaging winds ahead of that line, and then inside of here is where most of that rainfall is going to be. This is going to form sort of a line of storms, where it's going to be multicellular, so you can have some supercells that are going to be popping up along that line of storms as it continues on through the Ohio Valley into the eastern coastal states, where this system, this big blob of system covering the northeast and the Ohio Valley and all this, will move to the east and eventually merge with another low pressure system that is moving up the coastal region. And once it does, that's going to roll out a little bit of potential for some of those a little bit more severe storms to roll out, especially in the coastal regions and across the Ohio Valley. I think it's going to be fairly limited though. But that is what I am anticipating. So we're going to follow these models up until they get a little bit further. So these thin lines of storms, that's what they're talking about here. These very thin lines. Let me see if I can go to a regional map here. Probably go about here. Alright, so you can see that nice thin line of storms right here, and there could be some cells embedded in that where they might get a little bit of spin going up, a little mild amount of spin with the the bulk wind shear that's going to be in that area. It's not a very high wind shear, so I think that if there is going to be any tornadoes today, I think relatively they're going to be on the low end. Alright, so we're not even getting a tornado threat here. See, the wind is decent. It's not staggeringly high. Maybe up above 1 kilometer, we're getting a little bit of higher levels of wind, but at the surface, we're getting a little bit. I mean, there's wind there, but it's not really blowing me away as far as the wind is concerned. Alright, so, and then this is kind of hatched out, so I think the winds are actually going to be a little bit better as soon as the storm comes across. We've got a little bit higher winds the further south we go, so a little bit of that higher wind shear, but the cape isn't very high. I'm only getting 27 in surface cape, so it looks like even though we have a broken cap, and that's mostly because of that buoyancy and that moisture that's left over in that area. Even though we have a broken cap, I mean, the instability really doesn't look all that bad. Yeah, low levels of cape, a lot of wind shear though, kind of curving the other way on this one. Nice broken cap, but then look what happens over here up, towards 1 kilometer. It seems like it kind of seals off again. So at the surface level, there's a little bit of instability going on at the surface level, and it kind of goes up and down through the atmosphere as well, but there's not a whole lot. Let's take a look at some of these isolated cells going through the Ohio Valley. Alright, so we do have some marginal severe risk, but it looks like the cap might be a little break in the cap, but not a very wide one. And then that's where we're getting a little bit of that increase in surface cape, where we're getting 653 in surface cape instability there. Got some decent wind shear down here. Not staggeringly high, but enough. A lot of moisture and a little bit of increase in heat, and that might be from as a result of the daytime heating and the buoyancy that's in the atmosphere there. So those isolated cells popping up behind this line of storms, that is really that's really what we got to pay attention to as it moves throughout the day. Then we're getting some of that marginal tornado risk got a break in the caps, very big increase in moisture. The heat is mild, I would say moderate at best. Now you're getting a little bit of that curvature in that wind field right there. A little bit higher winds at the surface level. Surface cape is still relatively low at this point. It's looking 359. Hydrograph looks good, actually. That's a pretty nice structure for the hydrograph there. Okay, and then we get, wow, a lot more of these little pop-up isolated cells that are kind of coming up behind this line of storms. We're getting a little bit higher in the marginal tornado risk. Hydrograph looks good with that nice structure that's going on there. Got some wind shear down here at the bottom. Nice kind of strong bulk wind shear at about probably 60 knots, I would say. A little bit of curvature in that wind field as well. So that tells me there is a little bit of vorticity in that area. Nice break in the caps here. We got moisture and we got heat a little bit. Not a whole lot of heat, but we do have enough. It looks like it kind of increases. There's a little bit of a decrease around 3 kilometers until it goes up above 6. All right, but a lot of moisture in that area, which is going to further that instability quite a bit. Okay, so looking out in the middle of Ohio, getting a little bit of a marginal severe risk, but not as high as of a severe risk. Hydrograph does have a critical angle, but it doesn't really have a nice hooking structure. So that's not really impressing me all that much. Let's go to the next frame if it decides to load. There we go. Alright, so those cells are building a little bit here in Ohio. Seeing like they're trying to ramp up a little bit, but it looks like they're going to be marginal severe cells. Still, like I said, a lot of moisture, and the heat's kind of up and down. It is there, but that's not amazingly high. In about 812 relatively in surface cape. And that wind shear is moderate, but it's relatively low. It doesn't look like it's very high until it gets further up in the atmosphere. So, which that could mean that you could have some low top convection out here, and that's really the concern for today. But it's not a high concern. It's not like this is going to be an emergency situation. You know what I mean? There could be some low-topped convection that's in this system today, which could cause a couple of tornadoes, little brief tornadoes, to spin up momentarily. But I'm not looking at the possibility of big, massive tornadoes that are long track. I don't think that that's feasible for today. Got some wind shear going on down here at the surface, kind of moderate wind shear. Until it gets up into the atmosphere, kind of supporting that theory of some low-top convection that's going on. 870 roughly in surface cape, which is pretty much the average for this time frame, what we're seeing across the Ohio Valley. LCL is pretty low at this point, and getting a little bit more of a hooking structure a little bit in that hydrograph, but still kind of wedged a little bit there. And then we're looking at the next frame before this line moves into the coastal regions, and it seems like that threat kind of dwindles down with a little bit of baby shear down here, and still getting halfway decent cape levels on the surface, 559 in instability. And that hydrograph kind of has a general storm structure, but a little bit on the smaller side. Alright, so now we're getting into that region here where these lines of storms are starting to try to connect with that surface low from the other portion, the other surface low that's on the Atlantic coast. So right ahead of this line is where we're looking at for primarily those damaging winds going into Virginia and parts of the East Coast for today. So let's take a look at the atmosphere here in northern North Carolina. Okay, getting a marginal tornado risk here. Really stretched out hydrograph here, but it doesn't look too bad. as for the storm development. It's got a nice little hooking structure going up here. Got moderate heat and moisture going up in here. It looks like it increases a little bit at higher up in the atmosphere, so that's going to be sufficient for some of those low top cells. We got some wind shear that's going down here with a nice curving structure. Alright, got 635 in Cape, so a little bit of instability going on in there. Wind barbs are looking good, but the wind is relatively low as far as the wind barbs go. At this point anyways. Now we move into the next frame where this is kind of running off to the northeast. This is kind of blowing through these eastern coastal regions. We're going to look at the southern kind of region of North Carolina as we kind of continue through here. Got a nice broken cap, got moisture and kind of up and down and heat going up into the atmosphere. A couple increases in a couple spots. The LCL is relatively low between the surface and 1 kilometer. Got that nice, it looks like a little bit on the lower end as far as the wind shear amounts. It's going to be windy, but it's not going to be unbelievably windy. That's what this is looking like, but you get that nice curving structure there, so that would support some of that vorticity. But we're looking at lower levels of surface cape, where the ML cape might be upwards of, well, the most unstable cape might be, 500 to 600 range, with a surface cape generality of 315 surface cape. So hydrograph is looking a little bit better with that storm structure there. So what I'm seeing in this region here is that it's going to be a little bit more supportive for some updrafts in this area. That is what the wind shear is telling me right now. It's going to be, it's going to support some of these updrafts here. Let me look at upper South Carolina, see what's going on just south of that border. Yeah, so that's kind of what this is showing me too, as far as the updraft here, where that wind shear is coming up and that curving structure. It's going to be a little bit more supportive of those updrafts, even though we're getting low cape here. A little spike in moisture in the south here, and heat as well. Hydrograph pretty much everywhere looks pretty good. Where we're getting these purples now, and it's curving through this region here, where that's where you're going to get a little bit more of that supercell possibility for development throughout the day. By this time, this is going to start wrapping up here in the Ohio Valley. I think this is going to be periodical for their severe risk up here. Right now, the cap is starting to kind of come back, and you're starting to get disturbances here in the wind field down at the bottom. And the hydrograph is just kind of meshing. So this is pretty much done by this point here. So all we have to worry about is this section, really, that is starting to merge with that low as it comes up the coast. And this is just kind of feeding it a little bit of energy to kind of ramp up and down here as it sees fit. I don't think it's going to be terribly extreme or intense, but some severe potential out of this could be possible. Alright, so pretty much all the way that we've seen all these models going into the eastern states, we've seen that nice curvature in wind field, moderate wind shear that is sufficient, but low levels of surface cape relatively. But we do still have some support for some of those updrafts. Hydrograph looks good with a nice storm structure there. Alright. And then it looks like we got some isolated cells that are kind of building here. I don't know how much the atmosphere is going to be sharing that instability there. Looks like it's a little bit more unstable up here, but the wind doesn't look that impressive. It's kind of going up and down. The hydrograph is a little bit scattered here. We do have some critical angle with some hooking there, but it doesn't look as organized, I would say. It seems like these are struggling to kind of get organized, and yeah, that's just kind of a mess right there. So a little bit less of that organization up there, so I think that it's less feasible for, I mean, you might have some random spikes and little downdrafts or something like that that's going to pop up here momentarily, but they're going to be very brief for the most part. Just ahead of this in North Carolina now, we're still getting a pretty stable wind field here. Not overly stable. It's a lower wind shear, but a little bit of that curvature there that's on the surface. Still a broken cap, up and down in heat and moisture, and that hydrograph is still looking good with that storm structure that's going on there. Still supportive of some of that updraft that's going on, but we're getting low levels of surface cape here. So down here further in what what is this? Oh, I'm sorry. This is North Carolina. We're looking in Virginia. I apologize. I'm looking at the map wrong. It's early in the morning. So looking up here in northern North Carolina, rather down here at the southern end of that storm, we're getting a more stable wind field here with that moderate wind shear, broken cap at this point. Nice looking hydrograph storm structure. All right, so with all the southwesterly flow that's coming into the country from here, you got winds coming in here from the southwest or south in these areas right here, and that is mixed with that buoyancy and that kind of instability that's left over from the storms last night. Just the direction of where it's coming from mixed with this low as well, it's going to be a little bit more supportive of those updrafts in this area, and that's really the primary tornado threat for today. I think that that is going to be the issue, with maybe possibly some smaller brief spin up tornadoes. It is a possibility. I don't think it's a very high possibility, but I think that it isn't zero either. I think damaging winds and torrential rainfall, possibly some hail attributed with some of these storms as they continue on, especially in these isolated storm cells that are moving through the northeast region right now here. Oops, I clicked for some reason. That might be a possibility as far as the hail and the damaging winds. That's the primary threat for today. So just make sure you're weather aware. Listen to your local weather stations and your weather alerts that you have on your apps or anything like that. And just make sure you're taking the proper precautions. Make sure your family is safe today and your property and things like that. And I hope that everybody has a good day despite the rainy, crappy weather we have across the region today. Thank you for joining me.